Hey guys, Henning and Morten from FlippedNormals here. If you want to follow along with these tutorials, all the project files are available for free download on the FlippedNormals marketplace, so check out the link in the description. In this video, we are going to be starting the modeling of our lightsaber. Now, we highly recommend that you just watch the last part of this as well, where we cover the interface and how to actually work with the UI in Blender. That's going to save you a lot of trouble in this one.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good tips in that first video, a lot of hotkeys that we go through, a lot of basic hotkeys. So it's just really going to give you a better foundation for starting this series.
So the very first thing we're going to do, which every single Blender tutorial ever does, is you delete the cube. So hit the X key. We have already removed the confirmation toggle from this in the last video. Now what you can do as well, you can go to File, Defaults, and you can now hit Save Startup File. This means that this is going to be the default startup file, and you're not going to have this cube at anymore. So the first thing we are going to be doing is we are going to go into the front view. So we can do this by hitting the I menu for this, which is the tilde key, or the key which is below your escape key, depending on your keyboard layout. And then we are going to get a reference picture, and we're going to drag this reference picture into Blender. Now this reference picture you can find a link to in the description. It's incredibly easy to drag reference pictures into Blender. You simply just find it here and you drag it in, and there we go.
So wherever you drop it in the viewport, that's where it's going to appear. So we just try to drag it right here in the center of the scene. Yeah, like that. So it's also view dependent. That's why we go to an orthographic view like the side or the front view, because that way we know that the reference is coming in completely straight.
And then we are going to move this just down the y-axis, just so it's not going to interfere with our model. So our model is going to be here, and then our reference is going to be down here. We can also make this unselectable as well, and we can easily do this by going under the filters, enabling selectability, and then we can just make this reference non-selectable. So now we can't select it, and you can't move it around.
Yeah, you really don't want it to be selectable when you're modeling, because maybe you go out of edit mode to object mode, you move some things around, all of a sudden you've moved your reference plane.
That is the bane of your existence, because now nothing is going to match up. Then we can also just double click it to rename it, and we can call this reference, because by default it's going to be called an empty, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you know what an empty is. And then we are going to, actually the last thing before we do it is we're going to just move it up as well. Just select it and just move it up so it sits nicely on the ground as well.
And remember, you can do this with the G key and then hold down the middle mouse button in any direction to snap it.
And then we are going to make it unselectable. So we are going to be building this from the most basic primitive you can think of. Whenever you build anything in 3D, you really want to think, what's the closest geometric shape I can think of when it comes to this? If you're building a table, it's probably a box. If you're building a basketball, it's probably a sphere. In this case, this is a cylinder. This is a perfect object for this because it is just, a cylinder.
And the cool thing about a lightsaber, even though it's technically a really simple object and just a cylinder with cylinders on top, we can go through a lot of really interesting actions and show you basically everything modeling you need to know in Blender just with one cylinder.
Yeah, so if you can model this lightsaber, then you have a foundation for everything else you can model. So we are going to make a new cylinder by hitting the Shift A key, and then we go under Mesh and we go to Cylinder. Now you can see we have a menu here to the bottom left, which says Add Cylinder, and here you can change your segments. You can also change the radius and depth of it. We are going to be using 16 as a default ratio. Keep in mind that the moment you use a different tool, this menu here disappears. So you really want to make sure you have the correct amount of segments and everything here before closing it. You can also enable generate UVs as well, which is going to generate UVs for you if you're a bit more advanced user and you know what this actually means.
Yeah, most of the time you want to leave it on by default.
Yeah.
Also, an important thing to keep in mind, especially when you're modeling, you have segments like this. Obviously, you get one shot, you click away from this cylinder, the menu is going to disappear, but you can always create a new one. In terms of segments, it's pretty helpful. I like to keep it in what's called a power of 2 or something. So you always stick to it would probably minimum be 8 segments, 16, 32, 64. You probably never do 64 unless you're doing a really high resolution object. but like sticking to that, so you can always multiply by 2 and you have the power of 2, that tends to give you great results because it's really good at holding the form, and most of the time it makes it a lot easier to model. Yeah,
one of the specific cases which makes it easy to model is that you can often now just model like 1/4 of it. Let's say you have a crazy shape, like it's a column or something. You can now just model this part, and then you can just duplicate it around to the other parts without it being a problem.
Yeah. Like, that being said, of course there are instances where maybe you need 18 or 20 or 24 sides to it, but as a rule of thumb, 8, 16, 32 is always good to stick to.
Yeah, exactly. So we are now just going to be setting up a quick view or a quick layout for modeling here. We can again go into the front view by hitting the tilde key, and then we have a front view. And like we showed you in the last video, we can now drag it from the top corner here, and now we can make another view. So this can still be our front view, and this can be our 3D view. It's really beneficial to have both, just because you can move stuff precisely here, and you can see what's going on in this view. Then we can enable the wireframe view by holding on the Z key and going to wireframe, or we can hit Shift Z, which is just a really nice toggle. You can also use the X-ray feature as well, which is quite handy if you just want to see what's going on. But in this case, we're going to be going to the wireframe view. Then we are going to be scaling this down. Just hit the S key, and then we can just scale it down. And then we're going to be moving it up.
And just a quick note for anyone watching. If there's at any point you're confused about a hotkey or you can't quite remember, in case you haven't noticed the giant letters at the bottom right corner of the screen, it always displays which hotkeys we're actually using.
So the way we often model in 3D is that we start by like this one shape here, and we're just going to be blocking out this. So the way that we're going to be doing this is, in this video, we're going to be blocking out the main shapes, and then in the next video, we're going to be refining the shapes and showing you some more advanced modeling techniques. So let's go into edit mode by hitting the tab key. And now we can hit 1, 2, and 3 to go between vert, edge, and poly mode, and just go to poly mode, and we can now select this here. Obviously, the reference isn't perfectly orthographic because it's, from the real world, so it's not going to fit perfectly, but it's good enough. So we can now hit the G key and just move it into place like so. We just want to make this nice and simple and make the cuts where these different parts are, and then we're going to go in and refine them later on.
Yeah, it's like having these two viewports just make it a lot easier. The fact that you have a reference viewport where you can just view to see if it's actually on model, and having the 3D viewport to actually model just makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. So we can now use one of the most basic modeling tools in all of 3D, which is the Extrude tool. You get this by hitting the E key, and now you can see that it just extrudes it up. What this is actually doing is just taking the polys here and basically just moving them up while being connected. You're going to be using this tool all the time for basically whatever it is you're doing in 3D.
An important note is that you can see once you extrude, you actually leave behind an edge. So from the point of extrusion, you have an additional edge, and now you have like connecting polys in between to create that extrusion.
Yeah, you're not moving it.
No, you're not just moving it. So it's like you create more geometry this way.
One thing to keep in mind as well is that this is a mistake every single person is going to be doing, and we'll show you a bit more about this later on, is if you were to hit the extrude now and then right click, it would look like nothing has happened. But in reality, you have actually created more geometry for this.
So this is one of those instances where, unlike when you're moving something with the grab tool or move tool, it doesn't actually cancel the action. It still performs the action, it just doesn't perform the moving part of the action.
So to show you where this here is really bad is if we were to go into a modifier and add a subdivision modifier, subdivision surface, we are going to go into this in depth in next chapter.
We just want to show you the mistake it creates
right now. So if we were to now just do this, you can see that this is the mistake we're talking about. You hit the E key, then you right click. It's super sharp up here, but it's not on the bottom. And this is because we now have additional extrusions right on top of each other, which is just causing all sorts of issues. So just be aware of that. And we're just going to undo all of this, and now we're back to normal. And you can double check it by moving the points around. So now we have an extrusion here. We just hit the E key for that, and now we can hit the scale key or the S key to scale it in like this. And we just want to follow the form of this black one, the inner one. We're not going to be looking at these shapes for now. We're going to do that in the next chapter. We are only going to be dealing with the main ones for now.
Yeah, it's important to note that once you perform an extrusion like this, it's not necessarily the only correct way to extrude and then move it, like we're doing now, where we're extruding and then canceling the move with right click, then scaling. That's also a perfectly legit way to use the extrusion tool.
Yeah, like with anything in 3D, there's a million ways of actually doing anything. There is no right or wrong way. Well, there is a wrong way.
There's definitely wrong ways.
Definitely wrong ways.
But there's also many right ways.
And then we hit the E key again, and then we can just drag it up, and we're just going to move it all the way up here. And if you look at the reference now, there are a few different pieces here. We generally want to keep pieces which have a different material as separate objects. So we're just gonna keep that in mind when we're modeling now.
And that's a very, very basic thing that every beginner sort of struggles with and has questions about. What do I do with modeling? But the simple answer is, like, if you think of a shoe, right? Don't model a shoe with the shoelaces being one object connected to it. If it's disconnected in real life, then disconnected in 3D. That's the general rule.
Yeah, that's going to be true for the vast majority of everything you make.
Unless it's a game model where everything is connected because of optimization most of the time. But like if you're modeling for something like this, keep it separate.
Now we hit the E key again for extrude. Now we hit the right mouse button, which looks like nothing has happened. But if we now were to scale it up, you can now see that it actually scales it up like this. Then we hit the extrude again, and we can now just get this nice little shape. And now we're going to use a different tool. This is the Inset tool. If you hit the I key, we get the Inset tool. And this is a really, really nice tool. If we just do this again, and then we hit the I key. This is essentially extrusion and scaling at the same time.
Without it actually moving it up or down in any axis. So it's a different way of performing sort of an extrusion operation, but it has a few different use cases.
Yeah, it's exactly the same as hitting the extrude key like this and then hitting the scale key.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we can now hit extrude again and just get it up to this shape. And then we do inset. You can see in the wireframe where the edges are just by following these 2 points. And then we can do an extrude again.
Yeah, so an important note here is that you wouldn't be able to use inset for what we just did here. So an extrude automatically helps you with moving, right? So that's the one action where it differs from the inset. It doesn't actually scale by default. So here we need to use an extrusion again.
So if we want to move this out here, we can't do an inset and move an inset outwards.
No.
That'll be an outset. So we are going to be extruding now, and then right click, and then we're going to be scaling. And you can just see very quickly that with just a few select tools, you can do basically most things here. If you have move, extrude, inset, and scale, like you can really do most things when it comes to this. Then we can move this up just by hitting the G key. We can hit the G and then the Z key, and that's going to move it up like so as well. Just move it a little bit. And then we hit extrude as well again, and we move it up. And then you see we have these nice shapes here. We're gonna detail them more in the next chapter, but for now we are gonna be just doing extrusion, and then we're gonna be scaling it up just a little bit. It becomes a bit tricky to match it up to the view when you have a lot of perspective distortion going on like this, but that is just the life of a 3D artist. And then we hit, you guessed it, extrude again.
I hope you guessed it. That's not insert, but extrude.
And then we have inset. And now we're just insetting in here. And let's just move it up a little bit with the scale. And now we're just going to do the last bit here, which is just the top part of the lightsaber. Now you can see here that this should really be a bit bigger, and maybe we want to like fade off a little bit. So what we can do now, we can go into edge mode by hitting the 2 key, or clicking up here. And now we can select the edge loop around here. This is really one of the core things in 3D as well. If you want to hit an edge loop here, you simply alt-click on it, and that's going to select an edge loop. You can just alt-click on any edge, and that's going to select the edge loop for it.
Yeah, so an edge loop, for anyone out there who doesn't know, is just a loop of edges. It's all the edges that are connected to either side of an edge.
So alt click on the edge you want, and you're going to be doing it all the time. And now we can hit the scale key, and we can just scale it up so it just fits a little bit better. Now, one thing you can't actually see in a reference is we need to have a part for the actual blade as well, like the laser part, the light part of the lightsaber.
Laser hole.
Little laser hole.
That is probably the technical Jedi term for it.
Yeah, we're going to get like a cease and desist letter from Disney now because of that.
Not again.
Not again. So hit the inset again, just hit the I key. And now we're creating the laser hole. And this is where we're going to get hate from all the Star Wars fans because I have no idea how big this is supposed to be.
Yeah, there's probably accurate dimensions, and we need like one of those like crystals and stuff, and you know. But
yeah, we're not doing crystals. And then we do extrusion again, and now we really blocked it in. Now, if you want to make the laser hole, I suppose, bigger, we can now grow and shrink the selection. This is really handy. Like if you want to make this bigger, you can select all of this and just scale it up. So we'll quickly show you how to do that. If we just deselect everything, just for clarity, and we now select the inner hole, you can hit Ctrl and the plus key to grow your selection. You can also hit the minus key or Ctrl minus to shrink it. This is also on the numpad, so be aware of that. Because Blender likes to stretch your arm. So if we were to just scale this now, you would see what happens. This just scales it uniformly up, which is not what we want. We want to scale it only on one axis. On
two axes.
On everything but one axis.
Yes,
actually.
that's a third way of saying it.
Yes. Yeah, you want to scale on two axes. So there are two ways we can do this. We can use the scale one here. Just click the scale tool, and you see you have this little gizmo between the different axes. So if we were to hit this one now, between the red and the green one, between X and Y, now we can just scale it on this. And that's the easiest way of doing it. But the more advanced way of doing it, which relies on using hotkeys, is if we hit the scale key, or S for scale, and now we hit shift and the axis we don't want to scale on. So in this case, we don't want to scale on Z. So now we hit shift Z, and now it's going to scale on everything but Z. This is confusing in the beginning.
Yeah, but this is going to be, like, honestly, the amount of times when most of the time you actually restrict the set axis or whatever axis is up. That's usually how you do when you do restrictive scaling like this. It's going to be so useful for anything modeling. So just like go over this a couple of times to make sure you understand it, because it's going to be so valuable.
But if you are completely stuck and this doesn't make sense to you, which is totally fair as well, you can use the gizmos. Like this is more advanced, so just keep in mind it's not cheating to use the gizmos.
No, they're there for a reason.
They are there for a reason. So now we really blocked in the main parts of this. Now we can refine this part here a little bit on the bottom. We're going to be using a different tool for this. This is called the Add Loop and Slide, or Loop Cut and Slide tool, and this allows you to insert loops. Now if we hit Ctrl R, we can get this tool up and going. Ctrl R is something we're going to be using all the time. So if you just hover over parts now, you can see that's going to add or do like a preview of the loops. So we just want to add a loop around here so that we can get this nice little curvature going on, and then you just click it.
So whatever you do, you just hit Ctrl R, it'll give you the preview. You click to sort of commit to create it, and then you click again to finalize the creation.
Yeah, this becomes very intuitive as you go along, and it's actually a really good tool. And then we can create another one down here. And now we can scale this in. So the reason we're adding this loop is because if we want to scale this part in like so, you need some loops here. There are many ways of doing this, but the loop slide tool is incredibly important. So if we just select the loop now, just alt click the loop, and then we can just hit scale, just S to scale in. And now we have some shape here. And if we want to make this a bit more refined, maybe we want to make this a straight line up, we can add another loop. So hit the Ctrl R key, and we can just drag it to where we want to be. And now you hit scale to scale it in.
So when you create these loops with the loop slide tool, it's actually also possible to create the loop right in the center, right between two opposing edge loops.
That's really useful as well. So if you want to have it right in the center, we're going to be doing this a bit in the next chapter as well. I produced a little teaser for you. Is if you just slide it like this, then you hit the right mouse button. Now it's going to cancel it, meaning it just cancels the transform for it. So if you want it to be exactly in the center, this is very useful. You can also hit the Ctrl R key, and before you commit to it, Now you can scroll up and down, and now you can see that you get multiple loops. Very useful if you want to have more control, and you can just slide them up and down. So Ctrl Z to undo that, and we can just hit Ctrl R again, and we're just going to refine this volume just a little bit, just so it matches the reference a little bit better. And this is something you can keep doing forever. You can keep refining these things as you go along.
Yes.
So with all this said, we now have the main blocking part for our lightsaber. And in the next chapter, we're going to be looking at how we can refine this, how to make this into basically a proper production model. It's going to be a real nice model by the time we're done with this. So stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next chapter. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And, just let us know in the comments what kind of Blender content you want to see in the future.
So if you want to follow along with this chapter that you've just watched, make sure to head over to the FlippedNormals Marketplace. There's a link in the description where you can pick up the free project files for this lightsaber project. So we have project files for each chapter. So you can kind of follow along to see, okay, what is the progress from chapter to chapter here.